Welcome back everyone, Oz here, and today I've got some r/creepy encounters for you all. This one should be a nice, fun, and somewhat creepy subreddit for y'all to listen to. Bit of a mix of creepypasta, but not as spooky. Hopefully y'all enjoy. This one's brought to us by Cool Girl Here. Stranger in park started asking me suspicious questions about my autistic son. My youngest son is autistic and 5 years old. It's very obvious that he's autistic. He constantly sins with his hands, rocks back and forth, and doesn't respond to communication. He's a Gestalt language processor, so he repeats catchphrases that only I can understand. For instance, he'll say, "Whittle wobbles," when he has a hole in his sock. Saturday, I took him and my daughter, 8, to the park. A man, probably in his mid to late 30s, was there with who he said was his niece. Her and my daughter hit it off, so he came over to talk to me. My son is in his own little world, but playing on the equipment from time to time, and he hits himself in the head, so I constantly redirect him. The man asks if my son is autistic, and I say yes. He then asks when he was diagnosed. I told him at the age of 2, almost 3. He asks if he's in regular classes or special needs. I don't answer him right away because I'm getting uncomfortable. He can tell and responds with, "I think my nephew is autistic and he's 3. So I let my guard down a little, which was the wrong decision. I tell him he's in a special needs class. He asks what school because he wants to know options for his nephew. I hesitate and then tell him the 4 schools in the district that offer a special needs class. Not specifically which school my son goes to. Then he asks if my son runs off a lot. I just reply sometimes. He notices the GPS tracker on my son's ankle. He asks how well that tracks him and if he ever tries to take it off. At this point, I realize that this is not a conversation I want to have. I tell him that I'm not comfortable talking to him about this anymore. He responds with, "I'm concerned about my nephew." I tell him that not all autistic children are the same and he should get him evaluated. I call my daughter over, who was upset because she was having fun playing with a little girl, and pick up my son and we go to the car. I'm watching him as we leave and he's just staring at us. My daughter asks why we had to go and I tell her that we have to go home and do stuff around the house. She's very intuitive and asks, "Is it because of the girl's stepdad?" I ask her why she thinks he was her stepdad, and she said that the little girl told her he was her mom's boyfriend. I'm curious now. I ask what else she said about him. She tells me that the little girl said, man's name, likes to talk to girls like your mom and it makes my mom mad. I then ask if there was anything else and she tells me the girl said she was glad she met my daughter because she's an only child and doesn't get to play with other kids except at school. She also tells me the little girl asked for her phone number and wanted to see her again soon. The man was lying to me. For what reason, I don't know. I can only assume to make it seem like he was single? It could be more sinister than that, but I have no idea. I immediately call the police and tell them everything. They get my info and say they are sending an officer to the park. By the time the officer got to the park, a couple hours later, they were of course gone. I give the dispatcher a description, the man and the little girl's first names, and what I think he was driving since it was just us there, so I assume it was his vehicle in the lot. They tell me they will call if they need any more information. Lesson learned. I'm almost certain that he took advantage of my willingness to help another autistic person to try to get information about my son or about me. Update. The man has been found and arrested. My brother shared my story with his friend who is a sheriff's deputy in the county to the south of me. They had gotten similar reports about a man matching the same description. One report included him allegedly trying to lure a disabled toddler away from his mother at a trampoline park. They had video in his license plate this time. My brother's friend sent me the guy's mugshot and asked me if this was the man. It was. My brother's friend was investigating the trampoline park incident, but since it was a different county, didn't know of my report until my brother shared it with him. I asked about the girl that was with him and he couldn't tell me anything other than that she was safe. They arrested him in a county almost 2 hours away from me yesterday. I found out his full name and looked up all his charges. He had a warrant in the state to the north of me for so many things, including stalking, violating a protective order, and child endangerment. And now, new charges due to the trampoline park incident. Since nothing technically illegal happened in my situation, he won't have charges brought against him for that, but my story may be needed for his case. I'm not a lawyer or law enforcement, so I don't know the specifics on how or why, but maybe to show a trend of his behavior, targeting disabled children. When I find out more, I'll update here. Parents, trust your instincts. I know some comments think I went too far calling the police, but in this case, I am confident now that I did not. Who knows how many times he may have done this, but it went unreported. Honestly, the moment that he was asking about the ankle monitor was that was the red flag. That was the big moment, because I can understand the initial concern. Granted, him being concerned about the nephew was a bit of a red flag unless he's just a very involved uncle. But the tracking monitor and asking him how well it tracks him and if he ever tries to take it off was a bit much. Honestly, I don't know if I have the instincts to get the red flags from that kind of conversation. I honestly, I don't know. Maybe it's just a vibes thing. That actually does kind of make me really worried because I am a bit of a people pleaser and ugh. Bitter FXCC. Incident before work. This happened last year right before I switched up jobs in October. I used to work really early in the morning. I would catch a transit bus at 4:30, get to my intersection, and hopefully catch a connection bus. I don't like walking in this neighborhood for 2 reasons. 1, I was almost hit by a drunk driver while walking to work, and 2, I have a lot of body pain that makes walking distances difficult. My bus was running late, so sadly I did miss my connection and was forced to walk, so I began my 15-minute walk to my job in the dark of the morning. Now, the neighborhood is strange, one of those where you simply cross the street and you're either in the good or bad side of the neighborhood. I was in what was the newer, good side of the area. To add to this, the area is barely lit with hardly any streetlights, so it was an anxiety-inducing walk. As I'm walking, I see headlights down one of the darkened streets. It catches my attention and I glance down it for a split second. Then I focus back on the path ahead of me. Suddenly, the car is peeling out of that street and does a sharp turn to pull up right next to me. In the car were 3 to 4 guys. I want to say they were in their early to mid-20s. It was hard to tell. But I immediately went on high alert. When they got beside me, they started screaming at me about how they were going to kill me and a bunch of other shit before they eventually made a U-turn on the road and peeled off in the opposite direction. My heart was racing. I was shaking. It was the second time something bad happened in that neighborhood that put me off that I couldn't wait to get a new job away from the area. While their threats were empty and probably just a bunch of dudes being jackasses, it didn't take away the fact that for a split second, I was afraid they were going to mow me down with their car or jump out and beat the shit out of me. It only added fuel to the growing PTSD fire of almost getting rammed by a drunk driver. Luckily, I got a new job within a month of the incident, but I am still nervous around traffic, and every time a car speeds by me while I'm walking on the sidewalk, I feel my heart racing because I think of that time in the drunk driver. I definitely do think that they were just trying to fuck with you and just kind of stir some stuff up and all that, but that's just a not okay thing to do, and that really sucks because being alone on a sidewalk in the dark and having a car speed up to you, windows roll down, and people yell they're gonna kill you, yeah, that's gotta suck. This one's brought to us by Gaia Anna. I woke up to a girl watching me in my sleep. My female friend came to visit me for a long weekend and I, 22 female, won't be letting her stay ever again. Backstory. We were friends for maybe 3 months before we both moved to separate states and continued our friendship virtually until now. It has been a healthy friendship with open communication. We have had our disagreements, but mostly always talked it out and moved on. They mostly revolved around her believing I don't open up enough, and for me, she does things that are inconsiderate at times, like be jealous of my long-term friends to their faces and have an odd attitude problem at times. Only has been shown maybe 3 times. She can also be a bit obsessive and get upset when I don't text her for more than a day. She's got loads of my photos saved to her phone and remembers every little thing about me and has a list of my interests. I've seen it endearing until now. The trip. Day 1. The first day of the trip was great. She was bubbly and brought me a gift with a sweet note of appreciation. We went clubbing and headed to bed, separately, for the first night. This is where things got weird. Remember, we slept separately. Well, I woke up and she was in my bed, but not in my bed. She was sitting upright on top of the blankets next to me with her feet straight out and her back against the headboard while looking forward. I was startled and said, "Oh," instinctively. She just looked at me. She never said she was waiting for me to wake up or maybe she was uncomfortable on the couch. Nothing. Then she left my room. I have no clue how long she was sitting there. Day 2 through 3. Day 2. In the morning, we walked to the city where she was engaged and wanting to hold my hand while we were out and about. By midday, still day 2, her attitude has shifted completely and she is near mute. She isn't conversing with me, enjoying any of the activities or even smiling anymore, at the bar, arcade, or even at home watching movies. You know how those driving games take a silly little photo for your profile pic on the leaderboard? I was blowing up a kissy face in mine. I glanced at hers and even snapped a pic without her noticing. Her head was tilted forward, looking up at the camera. She was blank-faced, with you being able to mostly see the whites of her eyes. It was like the film poster of a horror film. See Orphan 2009. Anyways, for the rest of the trip, she continued to not smile. She was cold to every service worker. She responded with one-word answers otherwise, complained about any and everything. I asked, "Are you okay?" a couple of times, and she replied, "I'm fine," avoiding eye contact every time. Car rides were silent. Dinners were silent. Day 4, the final day. I drove her to the airport at 3 a.m. I asked if she enjoyed her visit, and she said it was okay. It was fine. I told her I enjoyed having her. She boarded her flight and left. I cannot figure out what caused this 180-degree shift. I paid for everything. Took her to all sorts of events she wanted to go to, and even took a day off, my first sick day ever, to take her to more. I felt myself overcompensating because I felt insecure of being a terrible host or something. I've had several friends stay with me and express to me that they've enjoyed themselves so much they never want to leave. I don't believe I did anything so wrong to ruin this trip. When she arrived home, she did not contact me, but she posted photos and videos of me captioned "mine" on her social media. I haven't brought this conversation to her yet. All of my family and friends believe I narrowly avoided a Selena Yolanda Lifetime film situation and that I was potentially with someone unstable. What do you think? I think she had a crush on you and just was too socially awkward to properly communicate or convey any of that. This could be anything from infatuation to sexual attraction, but platonic friendships usually don't have these weird caveats that you described, and I think that her getting into bed with you was an attempt at perhaps progressing things, and you shutting her down is why she became so quiet. Also, the posting of mine on the social media with videos and photos of you, that's a massive red flag right there. Same page, 7520, the worst substitute. This was in middle school. My teacher was absent one day, and this gym coach was substituting for him that day. I've seen him around the school before, and he's substituted for us a few times. I was sitting at my desk talking to my friend behind me and pretending to do my work, and for some reason, he decided to walk around the room to check if we were doing the assignment. So, I turned to my desk and started writing. He goes one by everyone's desk, but slows down once he reaches mine. He hovers over me, just staring down at my work. I got nervous because I didn't want him calling me out, but for some reason I felt his breath on me, heavily, which was grossing me out. He was a frail, old-looking man, so I didn't think much of it. He walked really slow and seemed harmless, but was very passive-aggressive when he spoke to us. I'd always get this weird, creepy vibe from him, but always thought it was just me. A few months go by, and the rumor of him being fired circled around the school. I was curious, so I'd ask around to know what the tea was. Apparently, the same teacher that would sub for my class was fired. He was caught trying to touch the girls during practice and throughout gym periods. He touched a girl, which was soon reported by the student. And he even got caught hiding in the crack of the door watching the girls change in the locker room. He just watched them. He finally got caught while doing so, and he was soon fired and kicked out of the school. The news made it everywhere. Even on the news, it spread like wildfire. Thinking back to it now, it gives me chills to think that he'd watch girls change, and thank goodness he got caught. You never know people's intentions. Yeah, I've seen some teachers do some pretty damn questionable things that raise an eyebrow, and I wouldn't be surprised if the events as described actually did happen, because this kind of shit does in fact happen. However, I am at times hesitant to believe these kinds of stories because when I was in middle school, there was a teacher who had a very unfortunate last name that definitely did not help with the rumors being spread about him. But the rumors that he was harboring CP in his school computer got so out of control that the administrators had to look into it, and the next year, he was gone. So of course, all the students jumped to the conclusion of, oh, he got busted. Nope, turns out he didn't like the fact that his students were making up rumors about him having CP and left and is now a principal of some other school that's north of where it previously was. Gotta keep details vague on this, but yeah, that kind of shit can really suck and it breaks my heart to think about that nowadays. Middle schoolers can be vicious, man. Banana slippery sticks. Crazy lady tried calling CPS. This isn't really creepy, but it was scary for sure. No, I am not the parent of the situation, but rather the kid. This was who knows how many years ago. I was young, maybe like 7 or 8. I think 7. I was with my 2 other siblings, my little brother and my older sis. We're all 3 years apart. Anyway, we were all in the car waiting for our mom, who had gone inside a Pizza Delight to pick up our food, which she had pre-ordered beforehand. This was in Bayers Lake, I think. We were only alone in there for maybe a minute, and I was tired, so I was half asleep against the window. It wasn't long before I was abruptly woken up to aggressive and loud banging on our car window. My sister, maybe 10 at the time, was sitting shotgun. I was in the back seat diagonal from her, and my little brother, probably 4, was beside me. We all immediately looked to where the sound was coming from, and we saw a 40 to 50-year-old looking lady. I don't remember much about her as it was laid out, but her hair was kind of frizzy, thin, and crazy looking. It was silvery blonde, and she had a receding hairline and was sweating profusely on her forehead. She looked a little on the heavy side, and her face was practically pressed up against the glass, and she had an intense, crazy look. She held her phone up against the window, my sister's window, with the white emergency dial screen up, and yelled something at us. I can't remember what. My mom was literally walking back to the car when this happened and was like, what the fuck? So she immediately gets into the car, and the woman runs around to the door and grabs it, yelling at her about how she's a terrible person for leaving her kids alone in a car and that she was gonna call CPS. Our mom explains to her that she was only gone for 5 minutes max and that she had a 10-year-old in the car with a phone. The car was locked and she could see the car from where she was in the restaurant. The lady keeps screaming at my mom though and grabs my mom's wrist. So my mother, who's in the military, immediately rips her hand off the wrist and slams the door, rolls down the window to give her the bird and books it. The woman was screaming the whole time and looked genuinely insane and terrifying. Anyways, we later dubbed her Pizza Karen around 2020 when we were reminiscing about the event and laughed about it now. But yeah, that's my story. Hope it temporarily fulfilled your boredom. To me, this sounds like someone who probably started out with good intentions but got a little lost with their motives because they probably saw kids in a car. If it was a hot day, considering the fact that she was described as sweating, maybe she was like, oh God, what if their parents are in a grocery store for a long period of time and, is just letting them bake in there? That's probably my first thought. If it was just a couple minutes and grabbing pizza, I mean, there's no problem with that as long as like the AC was on and everything was going well, but it's definitely just, ugh. The moment the mother came out, that should have been the end of that. But I think the lady in question got a little too committed to what she was currently doing and wanted to see it through. And that's probably what led to her technically committing assault and battery. This one's brought to us by Fox Mulder. I viewed the property of a man who murdered his previous tenant. When I finished uni, I moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on the website Spare Room. I was contacted by James, who had a room for rent on the outskirts of town I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me to view it. So we had a chat one evening, and it turned out we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming, and were movie buffs. By the end of the call, it had felt like chatting to an old friend, and I was looking forward to meeting him. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed he was in his 20s, like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he was wearing a hairpiece. If he'd told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but I'd already decided I didn't want to rent a room from him. I wanted to live with people who were a similar age to me. I was also put off by the house decor, which looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a games console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving to London for work. Coincidentally, my name is Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother, who lived next door. Then he started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hand on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said I had some other properties to view, but I would be in touch. I then made my excuses to leave, but everything about him screamed red flag. I just wanted to get out of that house. As soon as I was back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was and I absolutely would not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask if I had thought any more about moving in. I lied and said I found somewhere closer to town. I did eventually find something with some young professionals, which turned out to be great. Now, get this. Several months later, our town was shocked with the news that a man's body had been found in the fields on the outskirts. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much of that until I saw a murdered suspect was his landlord, James. The same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news and got instant chills. He was later convicted of Mark's murder. I can only assume that this was the Mark that supposedly had moved to London, because if it wasn't, then I have a question. Is he just targeting Marks and just trying to ice them off? Does he have a vendetta against people named Mark? Either way, definitely a close call, because who knows? Maybe Mark was on the menu. In multiple ways, apparently. Ugh. Don't forget, this is brought to you by GamerSups. Use code ODDS at checkout. It's basically a caffeine powder that you put in your water, and I actually really like it. I use this on a daily basis. Don't forget that every purchase you make using code ODDS directly supports the channel. And if you want a personal recommendation from me, I would either recommend the Soda Pressing Pear or Dragon Fruit Punch. Those two are currently my favorite flavors. And as a note, once we sell a certain amount of stuff, I get my own flavor and my own cup. And you all know I'm gonna choose some degenerate shit that's gonna make their PR team squirm. My goal is to make them regret partnering with me. So please, use code ODDS at checkout to make my dream come true of making a PR team squirm.